In this video, we're going to go over game one of a 3-round OTB event that I'm playing at the local chess club. This game is against Roy Knuth. I'm playing the black pieces, and if you saw in a previous video, I talked a little bit about how I was going to prepare for Roy. Alright, so let's jump right into the game and see how things went. So in the recap, or in the preview video, I thought Roy was going to play for a London with d4, knight f3, bishop f4. Very first move, Roy goes knight f3. So now I'm already thinking like, okay, I'm a little bit out of book here. Not out of book, but out of my prep. What first move should I play? And I've played a lot of different moves against knight f3. I decided to go with the flexible knight to f6. And then Roy played g3. And he actually said to me at this point in the game that he was preparing against another opponent. So he didn't realize he was playing me tonight, but he had been prepping this King's Indian setup. He said that during the game. So it's like, okay, that's fine. I will play sort of a Slav setup. And after pawn to d4, now we've transposed into almost a Catalan if white gets c4 in. And here I had a bit of a pause. I was trying to think, what should I play in this position? And I wasn't sure if I wanted to go for a setup with c5. I don't always like those if white gets c4 in. Or if I should play like c6 and kind of go for bishop f5, bishop g4. So after a bit of thought, I realized that I wanted to play the London in reverse. So I know Roy's a London player, and sometimes it's annoying to play against your own system with the other side. So I decided on c6, and after bishop to g2, I played bishop to f5. So if you think of this in reverse, I'm starting to build a London setup as soon as e6 is played. So here we have castle, e6, and now I have this London setup. Bishop outside the pawn chain, knight on f6, and I want to go knight d7, bishop here, castle, h6. So that's my plan. Another thing I wanted to do this game is I wanted to play a little bit faster. So this is a 60 plus 30 time control, and in my other games I spent a lot of time in the kind of late opening, early middle game phase, and I wanted to play more quickly here. So I thought, okay, let's just play this solid setup. Let's put all my pieces on the squares where I think they belong, and then let's see what white does and how we react to it. So here Roy plays the first move that I thought was a little bit strange, a3. And I was trying to think like, okay, what's the idea? He must want b4 and trying to lock down the c pawn. That was the only thing I could think of. And like I mentioned in the preview video for this game against Roy, I know Roy likes positions where things are very locked up and you can do a lot of maneuvering. So this might be part of his strategy, and I was thinking this during the game too. He might be trying to kind of lock everything up on the dark squares. If he can control e5, c5, it's hard for me to make a pawn break. So I play knight d7, and after rook to e1, I'm starting to think, okay, maybe Roy wants e4. This is where I have to think for just a bit and make sure that I don't go forward with my standard plan if I'm going to be hit with some kind of quick tactics. If e4 is played immediately though, I have 3 pieces on it, so that should be okay for me. So the threat is probably knight to h4, get this bishop to move, trade off the bishop, and then play e4. What I decided here was that I'm fine with bishop to e7, because after knight to h4, I could probably play bishop to g4, get white to open up this king side. So let's check the engine and just see if this was the correct line of thought. Knight h4, bishop g4. Yeah, and if white opens up the king side, oh, I'm sorry, there's knight to e4 tactic. That's right. So we have this bishop hitting the knight on h4. So this was kind of baiting white a bit, seeing if he would go for this knight h4 idea. Knowing that this pawn on e2 is pinned to the queen, there's no immediate e4 for white. So now after pawn to c3, here I took the time to play h6, knowing that after knight h4 I could drop back. Knight d2. Again, it looks like Roy is planning e4. It seems like all the forces are going towards playing e4. But here I castle, and I have a similar idea. If knight here, Probably bishop h7 immediately. e4 I can always trade off, and this knight in the end could become a problem. So let's say knight takes first, knight takes back, pawn takes, this knight is trapped, and if bishop takes, I can go grab this knight. And in the end, I'm up a pawn. So that's kind of what I had calculated. I was still ready for e4 with tactics. Now Roy plays b4. And if you look at the Stockfish eval here, it's interesting because Stockfish is saying it's a minus 1.7 already. But during the game, I did not feel my advantage was that large. I felt I was a little bit better, but I didn't appreciate how large the advantage was. And the reason black has a big advantage here is because what I can do is play moves like a5, e5, open up these dark pawns, and my pieces are really well placed. Like this h7 bishop piercing across the board is really well placed. This g2 bishop is running into a nice pawn chain. Not this pawn, but these three at least. So the advantage is 1.7. I probably would have guessed like half a pawn. But you can use the imbalances that you notice to help determine a plan. So this is a bad bishop, this knight's misplaced, this bishop runs into the pawn. This bishop points queenside, this bishop points queenside, so I kind of want to chip away at these pawns, and then I also have this diagonal, so that's why I want e5. So I'm using the imbalance here to help determine my middle game plan. I start with a5, and I think this was a good move. There's an immediate threat of taking here. This a pawn is pinned by my rook, so after takes, c takes, but then I have bishop takes and the pawn is still pinned. So I'm threatening to win a pawn here. Bishop b2 is played. Now I feel like this is a bad bishop. It's trapped in behind all these pawns, but my bishops still have a lot of flexibility, and I have these potential holes for this knight on d7 to get to. And I was even looking at lines where maybe this f6 knight comes back to d6 and eyes the light squares. And this bishop is kind of committed over here on the king side, so it can't easily help guard these squares. Now here I played e5. I think I did spend probably 3 or 4 minutes on this move, but according to Stockfish it would have been better to prepare e5 with queen to c7 first. So let's look at an example. Queen c7, let's say this knight moves back. I could play like rook e8, and there's no knight e5, there's no e4, so I'm really not in a rush here. But my plan can be to play e5 later, or I could play b6, c5 and try to continue to chip away at these queenside pawns. But e5 was a slight inaccuracy according to Stockfish. 0.6 of a pawn, 0.6 of a pawn inaccuracy. So I played e5 and Roy played bishop to h3. I think this was a good move, bishop to h3. It kind of highlights why e5 was a little bit premature, because now I see knight and bishop hitting the f5 square. So Roy is kind of using this change in the position to help determine his own plan. Now I played e takes d, and my initial thought was if c takes d, I can win the b pawn. But Roy doesn't have to go for this. Roy doesn't have to play c takes d immediately, and he made the correct decision here by playing knight to f5, playing very actively. And at this point, I had actually kind of planned on taking c3, but once knight to f5 was played, I decided to reevaluate the position. If I allow white to take back on d4, am I still happy with my position? So let's say rook e8, c takes d. Well, in this case, I guess I could still win the pawn. So knight takes d, like happened in the game. I was still happy with this position. I still felt that the bishop was bad on b2, and I liked my bishop on h7 quite a bit, and I like my pawn structure a little bit more. So I still felt that this was a good position, and I think the imbalances favor black. But let's say I play d takes c3, and bishop takes back. Pawn takes, pawn takes. Now this rook is being attacked and this bishop is still being attacked. And if I take here, queen takes, look at all these white pieces getting active. Bishop guards here, also hits d7 for some tactics. I don't like the amount of play that white is getting here. And if you check the eval, it's still an advantage for black, minus 0.8. But it's a minus 0.8 where white actually has an advantage of 0.2 in the position, and I'm up one pawn. So if you take one pawn being minus 1, but then you have to pull it back slightly because of all the activity that white has. I don't like that. I don't want to give white counterplay. I'd rather have even material where I kind of control the position. So that's why I decided here, I'm fine with rook e8. Let's just play this solid. And after knight takes d4, which the computer is saying is an inaccuracy, knight takes e7 check is a little bit better. Gets rid of my bishop pair, and then he can take back here next. Again, it's kind of a more dynamic way to play it. But after knight takes d4, now I felt that my position was pretty solid again, and I could use this solid position to now press forward. And I played knight to e5. I'm starting to eye ideas of knight g4, followed by getting queen or bishop on this diagonal, like maybe c5, maybe queen b6. But I'm also looking at knight to c4. So like if this knight moves to f3, I go to c4. So I'm trying to tie white down. And Roy brings the 4th rank knight back to f3. Now here I had a long think. And I decided knight back to d7 was a good move, because if I can trade off this knight for this knight, my remaining e5 knight can still control this d2 knight. The d2 knight does not want to go here because I go to c4. The d2 knight does not want to go out this way because I can also go to c4. So this d2 knight is sort of tied down. So that was my plan. And Roy took, which I was happy to see. And now we get this position where if you look at the imbalances, I think from just a few moves ago, my advantages with the imbalances has increased. There's no longer white control of the f5 square. This knight is dominating this knight. This bishop is well placed for queenside play. And this bishop is also kind of well placed for queenside play, with the potential to get on this diagonal against white's king. And maybe it gets on this long diagonal for queenside play. I also feel like I have the advantage with the pawn structure. So if you add all of these up, you can get to a 2-pawn stockfish edge. Now, if you would have asked me during the game, what's the eval here, I probably would have said a 1-point advantage. So I didn't do a good job fully understanding how strong my position was, but I think I did a pretty good job planning with the imbalances. Now here Roy plays f4, and this is something for you guys to take note of. When you play against players that are a little bit lower rated than yourself, if you try to keep playing for the imbalances and putting your pieces on good squares, sometimes your opponents will make their own weaknesses, and I think this is the case here. Roy wasn't sure what move to play, but he played f4 because he wanted to get some activity going. The problem with f4 though is it opens up this diagonal to the king, and this was a move that I had looked at already in advance, and I thought I had two good options here. I thought there was queen b6 check followed by knight c4 or knight retreating. So I played queen to b6 check. Roy played king to f1. Now here I really struggled with the calculation. I looked very hard at knight to c4, and knight to c4 is the critical move. After knight takes, pawn takes, this bishop is stuck on b2. This king is exposed, and my rook is coming over very quickly to d8. And if we look at the eval here, it's 1.6 for black. What I didn't realize was after e4, I have a strong advantage still, so looking at the computer, by playing rook to d8, and I thought he would play queen e2 and rook to d3. So I was a little bit concerned that all of these pieces would just trade off and that white's pawns would be strong. But let's play this out a little bit. Rook a to d8. If rook takes here, I can take back with the pawn. And this is something I didn't appreciate during the game. I didn't look at this clearly enough. Taking back with the c-pawn gives me a protected passer. No longer have double pawns. It's a really strong advantage. So that means, had I seen that, that means that white can never take on d3. That gives me a lot of control in the position. So let's say bishop back to g2. Now c5. And I'm trying to break through on the queen side, and the c-pawn's going to be a passer soon. So let's say b takes a, queen takes a. Look at the position for white. There's no good way to make progress here. Pushing these pawns doesn't do a lot because queen a4, and now this is triple attacked. I have a lot of things that I'm playing for. This bishop can come to c3, hit this pawn. Yeah, the position's really good for black, but it's something that I didn't appreciate, and this is a theme in my games. I'm having trouble calculating sometimes when I have the advantage, and I played knight back to g6. Very passive move, not fully understanding the power of that pawn on c4 with the wide open d file. Retreated the knight back. Roy plays knight to f3, and here I play bishop to f6, eyeing this bishop. Knight to d4, and now my worst piece is the knight on e7, so I reroute this knight. I'm also kind of trying to guard this f5 square. Queen to d2. Now, even though the material is even, I knew in the game that this was still a really good position for black. So I've just tried to improve all my pieces. Rook a to d8, e3, c5. The idea here is I'm threatening to open up the queen side, maybe play knight to c6, and I'm hoping that the exposed king in the end will give me some tactics. Maybe even the bishop coming to d3, bishop to e4. That white king is wide open. B takes c, queen takes c, king to g1. And I thought here a4 might be a nice move for white, so after king to g1 I played a4 myself, trying to trap in this bishop. Queen f2, bishop e4, rook c1, and now knight to c8. This knight is headed into c4, so Roy has to take. Queen takes, and here Roy resigned. And some people were wondering after the game, why did you resign so early, Roy? But he had 3 seconds on his clock when he played bishop takes c8 with a 30-second increment. And I think I had about 20 minutes remaining at this point. And he was just tired of defending this position. He didn't feel that he had anything he could play for. And he was just happy with the game that he had played up until this point. So he had decided to resign. The big threat that I have is bishop takes d4. And playing with this imbalance, bishop against bishop. So let's give white a move here. Bishop takes d4. Let's say c takes or e takes, it doesn't matter too much. And then a move like queen to h3. This is a really strong position for black. But I don't think that white had to resign there. There's definitely a lot of play in the position. That was just his choice. So what I liked about this game is I think, if we look at the chart, I think I did a good job increasing my advantage overall. This is a pretty solid looking chart. I played in a low risk way. But this was the moment where I think I really need to focus on kind of finding these sequences to increase the advantage even more quickly. I kind of relied on Roy to make some inaccuracies along the way to be able to keep increasing the advantage. So we see 7 inaccuracies by Roy. On this point, if he doesn't make an inaccuracy after knight g6, there's still a good chance for white to draw this game. So I was kind of relying on my opponent to make some inaccuracies. I'd like to clean that up and be able to calculate more clearly in this position and make sure that when white makes a mistake, or a weakness that I can capitalize on. And when you see f4, you kind of know it's a weakness. The question is just, how do I take advantage of it? This king is now really exposed. So that's kind of my big takeaway from the game. That's how I think about the middle game positions, how to evaluate, how to find a plan. And I hope this was instructive for you guys. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not a subscriber. Give the video a thumbs up. And if you want to become a ChessGoals member, if you're not a member already, you can join our Patreon for as little as $5 a month. You get into our Discord where we talk chess improvement. I'm in there all the time answering questions. And it's really a great community to help improve your chess. So $5 a month, patreon.com/chessgoals. Please consider joining. And thank you for watching the channel. And hopefully we'll see you in the next video.